Hello, my name is Philippe Girard. I am a professor in the history department at McNeese State University.
And I'm Amber Hale. I'm from the biology department at McNeese. Welcome to Your Grandma Rocks, where we explore the lives of famous women in history.
Welcome and bienvenue à nos amis francophones. Vous écoutez la radio de l'Université McNeese.
On the program today, music, literature, and history, as we retrace the life of a remarkable woman. She was a poet and a captive, and not much else.
She was a gifted woman who could have done much more than that in her life, but her life was marked by captivity, sorrow, and eventually murder.
Despite this, she wrote some of the most beautiful verses in the Italian language.
Her name was Isabella di Mora.
Along the way, we'll sample some music from Italy, and especially southern Italy, since she lived in what was then known as the Kingdom of Naples.
We'll start with one of the most recognizable Napolitan songs of all time, O Sole Mio.
This song has been covered many times. Which version did you select?
My daughter is a huge fan of the band Il Volo, which is made up of three young Italians named Gianluca, Piero, and Ignazio.
Let me guess. They're easy on the eyes.
They are, but they are more than just a boys band. We went to see them in New Orleans a couple years back, and they really have amazing voices. They began their career as individual contestants on an Italian equivalent of American Idol. They were so great in that show that the producers decided to put them all together and launch their recording career as a group.
And the first song they ever performed together was...
You guessed it, O Sole Mio.
Che bella cosa, una giornata sole, aria serena, dopo una tempesta, e l'aria fresca, pareggia una festa. Che bella cosa, una giornata sole.
Bonjour and welcome back to Your Grandma Rocks. We just listened to the song O Sole Mio, interpreted by the Italian trio Il Volo. Je m'appelle Philippe Girard.
And I'm Amber Hale. Today we're exploring the life of the Italian poet Isabella di Mora.
She was born around 1520 in the town of Favale at the southern tip of Italy.
At the time, the region was part of the Kingdom of Naples, which itself was a vassal of Spain.
You may wonder why Spain governed southern Italy, but during its heyday in the 16th century, Spain controlled territories going from Mexico to Peru, Belgium, Germany, and even the Philippines.
But today we are not here to talk about politics and diplomacy. We're here to discuss one singular woman named Isabella di Mora.
On our program, we typically showcase what we call remarkable women who managed to achieve a lot in the field of diplomacy, science, or the arts despite an environment that was not always favorable to members of their sex.
In the process, we've profiled some really high-achieving women like Cleopatra and Gertrude Bell. These were amazing stories, but may have given the wrong idea of women's history.
By showcasing individual stories of survival and triumph, we run the risk of giving a rosy view of women's history. Most women actually experience lives of anonymity, toil, and oppression. And more often than not, those lives went absolutely nowhere.
In other words, history doesn't always have a happy ending. And it definitely didn't have a happy ending for Isabella di Mora.
Her life actually started off fairly well. She was born into a noble family of southern Italy.
She was the lone daughter. She had 5 brothers.
Keep them in mind because they'll play an important role later on.
Yes, but early in her life, her father was the dominant figure. He taught literature and poetry to his only daughter, and in return, she adored him.
But in 1528, a war broke out between France and Spain over the Kingdom of Naples. Her father picked the French side, but that was a poor decision. Spain was the country that prevailed, and Isabella's father had to flee for France.
Isabella stayed behind in Italy with her brothers, and her life took a tragic turn from that point on.
Before we get there, a second song. It's another great Italian classic entitled Volare.
It's been covered by many people, but since we just talked about the Franco-Spanish struggle over the Kingdom of Naples, we went with the French band of Spanish origin playing an Italian song.
To top it off, that band even has an English name. They're called the Gypsy Kings.
Penso que un sueño parecido no volverá más. Y me pintaba las manos y la cara de azul. Y de provisa el viento rápida me llevó. Y me hizo volar en el cielo infinito. Volaré, oh, cantaré, oh, nel blu dipinto di blu, felice di stare lassù. Y volando, volando feliz me encuentro amado, amado que son. Y me talla en el mundo está lejos de paso de mí. Una música dulce tocada solo para mí. Volaré, oh, cantaré, oh, nel blu dipinto di blu, felice di stare lassù. Pienso que un sueño parecido no volverá más. Y me pintaba la mano y la cara de azul. Y de improviso el viento rápido me llevó. Y me hizo ir a volar en el cielo infinito. Volaré, oh, cantaré, oh, nel blu dipinto di blu, felice di stare lassù. Volare, oh, cantare, oh, nel blu dipinto di blu, felice di stare lassù. Pienso que un sueño parecido no volverá más. Y me pintaba la mano y la cara de azul. Y de improviso el viento rápido me llevó. Y me hizo ir a volar en el cielo infinito. Volaré,
Welcome back. I'm Amber Hale, co-host of Your Grandma Rocks, your favorite women's history show on KBYS.
Et je suis Philippe Girard. Vous écoutez la radio de l'Université McNeese.
We just listened to the band Gypsy Kings.
Today we're covering the life of the Italian poet Isabella di Mora.
She had a pleasant childhood until her father went into exile in France in 1528 when she was about 8 years old.
The exile of her father was a real heartbreak for Isabella. He had taught her literature and poetry, and she deeply loved him.
Her one hope thereafter was for her father to return from exile. Every day in her castle, she would look at the sea from her window and hope to spot the ship bringing her father home. And every day she was disappointed.
That's sad.
Did she ever see him again?
Never. Her father had actually been pardoned by Spanish authorities, so he could have returned to Italy anytime he wanted to. He just chose to remain in France.
Oh, that makes her situation even worse. I hope she never heard the true story behind her father's continued exile.
Hopefully not. Her mother was weak and easily dominated, so after her father was gone, Isabella's brothers ran the family affairs.
One of them joined his father into exile, but the other 4 remained in the family castle in Italy.
Literature and poetry were not their number one priority, to say the least.
No, they were brutish and uncultured. They also resented how their father had doted on Isabella, his only daughter, and they were going to make her pay for that.
So they kept Isabella locked up inside the family castle in Favale on a cliff overlooking the Ionian Sea.
It's like a scene out of a bad fairy tale. You almost expect her to grow her hair and sneak out from the window of the castle tower.
Well, a Prince Charming eventually did show up in her life, but we'll listen to a song before we get to him.
Can we listen to a happy song? Her life is starting to get pretty depressing.
I have just what you need. We'll listen to another song from Naples called Tuo fa l'americano by Renato Carosone.
Never heard of it.
It's an oldie from 1956, but it's quite famous. It's about an Italian who's fallen in love with American products like whiskey and cigarettes. You may have heard it in the movie The Talented Mr. Ripley, where Jude Law and Matt Damon sing it in a bar.
Ah, now I remember. Great movie.
That song was also made famous by the Australian band Yolanda Be Cool.
Ah, I remember that version too. We no speak Americano. Now you're starting to make sense.
That's good news, but we won't listen to either of these 2 versions. We'll go back to the original Italian recording by Renato Carosone.
Porte casone con un stemma a rete, una cuppulella che vi si era alzata, passa scampanianna pattuleta, con mano a papà te fa guardare. Tu fa l'americano, americano, americano, senta a me chi t'ho fa. Tu vuoi vivere alla moda, ma se bevi whisky e soda, poi ti senti disturbato. Tu abballo rock and roll, tu gioca a baseball, fai sorte per camella, ti devi dare la borsetta di mamma. Tu fa l'americano, americano, americano, ma se nati in Italia, senta a me non c'è sta niente a fa. Ok napolitan, tu fa l'american, tu fa l'american, tu fa l'american, tu fa l'american. fa l'americano, americano, americano, ma si nati in Italia, senta a me non c'è sta niente a fa, ok napolitan, tu fa l'american, tu fa l'american, whisky e soda e rock and roll, whisky e soda e rock and roll, whisky e soda e rock and roll, tu fa l'american, tu fa l'american, whisky e soda e rock and roll, whisky e soda e rock and roll, whisky, soda e rock and roll.
Bonjour à tous et bienvenue sur la radio de l'Université McNeese. Nous venons d'écouter Tu vuoi fare l'americano. Je suis Philippe Girard.
And I'm Amber Hale. Today we're covering the life of Isabella de Mora, a young noblewoman from southern Italy who for years was kept captive in the family castle by her jealous brothers.
Her beloved father was in exile in France, so Isabella lived a life of solitude under the thumb of her violent brothers.
Writing poetry was her only escape. In her poems, she described the region around her as an infernal valley filled with irrational people, deprived of intelligence. Day after day, the only thing she could hear was the constant rumbling of the river below, which drove her crazy.
The river was free to flow to the sea, but she wasn't.
She even fantasized about throwing herself into that river and drowning herself to end it all. She never went through with her projects of suicide, but she longed for the moment when she would be, quote, totally free from the stormy terrestrial cloud and among the blessed souls in heaven.
In other words, she was still in her 20s, but all she had to look forward to at that point was the sweet release of death.
That's sad. The only bright moments in her life were visits by her tutor. He introduced her to Petrarch and all of the great poets of Italian literature.
That tutor also put her in contact with Diego Sandoval, a Spanish noble who was stationed in Italy.
And with the help of the tutor, Isabella and Diego were even able to exchange some letters.
When you know how lonely her life was, that epistolary relationship was a real lifesaver.
Well, there was a problem.
She never caught a break, didn't she?
Nope. Diego was married.
Uh-uh.
Officially, Diego didn't write her directly. Instead, he sent letters in his wife's name, and then he slipped in some poems that he had written for Isabella. Then she would respond in the same fashion, using her tutor as an intermediary.
The question is, did they ever become romantically involved?
That's the great mystery of her life. Obviously, she longed for love and companionship. But Diego was married, Isabella was locked up in her chambers, and they corresponded through letters. So at most, it was a platonic relationship. In fact, the poems that she sent him were not about love, but about sorrow, frustration, and her sense of isolation.
That's what made her poetry so unique. She reminds me of the painter Frida Kahlo, who also lived a life of suffering and channeled that pain into her heart. We did a program about her.
In Isabella's words, she felt bitter, harsh, and lamentful. That's sad for a young woman in her 20s with her whole life ahead of her.
Those letters were in sharp contrast with those of another literary woman we've also profiled on the show, Héloïse d'Argenteuil, who lived in France in the 1100s. Héloïse's own letter to the man she loved were filled with passion and even described episodes of sadomasochistic lovemaking.
Nothing of that sort to be seen here. Though Diego Sandoval occasionally wrote to Isabella about love, he never specified which woman he had in mind. They could very well have been intended for his wife.
Still, even this platonic relationship was unacceptable for Isabella's brothers when they learned of it.
Uh-oh, I sensed some trouble ahead. Time to break for a song? Maybe one about love gone wrong?
Sure. Our last song was about an Italian wanting to be an American, so let's listen to an Italian who actually had an American passport. I'm talking here about Frank Sinatra.
Amazing singer. So was his daughter Nancy, by the way.
We'll actually listen to both of them at the same time, and this is a song about love gone wrong. Here's their famous duet, Something Stupid.
I know I stand in line until you think you have the time to spend an evening with me. And if we go someplace to dance, I know that there's a chance you won't be leaving with me. Then afterwards we drop into a quiet little place and have a drink or two. And then I go and spoil it all by saying something stupid like I love you. I can see it in your eyes that you despise the same old lies you heard the night before. And though it's just a line to you, for me it's true and never seemed so right before. I practice every day to find some clever lines to say to make the meaning come through. But then I think I'll wait until the evening gets late and I'm alone with you. The time is right, your perfume fills my head, the stars get red and oh the night's so blue. And then I go and spoil it all by saying something stupid like I love you. The time is right, your perfume fills my head, the stars get red, and oh, the night's so blue. And then I go and spoil it all by saying something stupid like I love you. I love you. I love you. I love you.
This was Something Stupid, recorded in 1967 by Frank and Nancy Sinatra. You're listening to Your Grandma Rocks on KBYS. I'm Amber Hill.
Et je suis Philippe Girard. Vous écoutez la radio de l'Université McNeese.
Today we're covering the life of Isabella de Mora, an Italian poet who spent most of her life locked up in the family castle by her jealous brothers.
To escape from a life of boredom and isolation, she began to exchange letters with Diego Sandoval, a Spanish nobleman who shared her passion for poetry. But her brothers eventually found out about it.
They became convinced that Isabella had become intimate with Diego Sandoval.
It's far from certain that this was actually the case, but they chose to strike back anyway.
In the male-dominated world in which they lived, they considered it their duty to protect the family honor and to look after their sister.
And by looking after the sister, that meant completely dominating every aspect of her life.
Yes, remember that her only crime had been to write poetry.
Her brothers first went after the tutor who had helped Isabella smuggle letters out of her castle tower.
They killed him.
After that, they went after Isabella herself.
It was not difficult to find her. She had been locked up by her brothers since their father had left for France. They found her where she always was, in her bedroom. She was holding in her hand some of the poetry that Diego Sandoval had sent her.
As far as they were concerned, that was proof enough that something fishy had been going on.
So they stabbed her to death.
She was about 25.
What a brutal end to a short and lonely life. All of that for writing poetry.
But the brothers were not done yet. They then went looking for their sister's alleged lover, Diego.
It took a bit longer, but they located him a few months later.
Let me guess, they stabbed him to death.
Yep.
The deaths of Isabella and her tutor were barely noticed at all.
According to the code of honor that prevailed in southern Italy at the time, the brothers were within their right to kill an employee who had betrayed them and a sister they suspected of infidelity.
Killing Diego Sandoval was a more serious issue since he was a noble from Spain, the country that controlled southern Italy.
So the brothers fled to France to reunite with their father. For the most part, they escaped prosecution.
It's not a very happy ending, is it?
No. The princess never reunites with her dad, she never escapes from her prison, and she never lives happily ever after with her Prince Charming.
And the bad guys get away with murder.
Literally. It's a sad story, but also one that is typical of the lives that many young women endured in the traditional patriarchal societies.
Even today, you regularly hear about honor killings of young women in places like Pakistan and Afghanistan.
It makes you wonder if humanity really is making progress. It seems that we are still reliving some of the dark times of history.
Well, in order not to get too depressed, we'll now listen to a song about how wonderful life is. This is Via con me by Paolo Conte.
Via, via, vieni via di qui. Niente più ti lega a questi luoghi, neanche questi fiori azzurri. Via, via, neanche questo tempo grigio, pieno di musiche e di uomini che ti son piaciuti. It's wonderful, it's wonderful, it's wonderful. Good luck, my baby, it's wonderful, it's wonderful, it's wonderful. I dream of you, chips, chips. Do 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 do, chi-boom, do 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 do, chi-boom, chi-boom, boom. Do 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 do. Via, via, vieni via con me. Entra in questo amore buio, non perderti per niente al mondo. Via, via, non perderti per niente al mondo. Lo spettacolo d'arte varia di uno innamorato di te. It's wonderful, it's wonderful, it's wonderful. Good luck, my baby, it's wonderful, it's wonderful, it's wonderful. I dream of you. Do 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 do, chi-boom, chi-boom, boom. Do 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 do, chi-boom, chi-boom, boom. Do 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 do. Via, questo amore buio, pieno di uomini. Via, entra e fatti un bagno caldo. C'è un accappatoio azzurro, fuori piove un mondo freddo. That's wonderful, that's wonderful, that's wonderful. Good luck, my baby, that's wonderful, it's wonderful, that's wonderful. I dream of you. Chips, chips, chips. Do 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 do, chi boom, boom. Do 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 do, chi boom, boom. Do 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 do.
Bienvenue à tous, c'était la chanson Via con me par Paolo Conte. Je m'appelle Philippe Girard.
And I'm Amber Hale. You're listening to Your Grandma Rocks on KBYS, a program about remarkable women from centuries past. Today we retrace the life of Isabella de Mora, a 16th century Italian poet who was jailed and then murdered by her brothers because they couldn't stand that she was educated and loved literature.
Her life was short and marred by solitude and sorrow, but her poetry has endured. She left behind 13 poems, which were found in her room after her death and included in various anthologies as early as the 16th century. Can you read one of her sonnets for us, Amber?
Sure. This one is about waiting for her father's return from exile. From a high mountain top where one can see the waves, I, your sad daughter Isabella, gaze out for sight of any polished ship, coming to bring me news of you, my father. But my adverse and cruel destiny permits no solace for my aching heart, but, enemy to any thought of pity, turns all my firmest hopes into laments. For I see neither oar cutting the sea, nor any sail that billows in the wind, so solitary is this dismal shore. So I can only curse my evil fortune, and hold in hatred this unhappy place, the only source of my tormented life.
How sad yet beautiful. Her works were first published in the 16th century, then forgotten for many years until they were rediscovered in the 20th century. She is now considered a titan of Italian literature who bridged the gap between Petrarch, the Renaissance, and the Romantic movement of the 19th century.
A sad yet beautiful life indeed. We're glad we could share it with you.
Quelle vie incroyable, en effet. This
program was funded by a Juliet Hardner Grant for Women in the Humanities. For more information on how to help finance fellowships at McNeese, contact the Foundation at 337-475-5588.
This program was also sponsored by the History Department of McNeese. To apply for a degree, contact the McNeese Admissions Office at 475-5504.
Thank you for listening and goodbye.
A boy went back to Napoli because he missed the scenery, the native dances and the charming songs. But wait a minute, something's wrong, 'cause now it's
Hey mambo, mambo Italiano, hey mambo, mambo Italiano, go, go, go. You mixed up a Siciliano, all you Calabrese do the mambo like a crazy with a hey mambo. Don't wanna tarantella, hey mambo. No more mozzarella, hey mambo. Mambo Italiano, try an angelada with the fish bacala and then hey Goomba. I love how you dance the rumba, but take some advice, paisano. Learn how to mambo. If you're gonna be a square, you ain't gonna go nowhere. Hey mambo, mambo Italiano, hey mambo, mambo Italiano, go go Joe. Shake it like a Giovanna. Hello, kiss it, did you get happy in the pizza when you mambo Italiano? Hey, Chadnur, you don't have to go to the school. Choose to make it with a beat the bambino. It's like a bean. Kid, you good looking, but you don't know what you're cooking, do you? Hey, mambo, mambo Italiano. Hey, mambo, mambo Italiano. Ho, ho, ho. You mixed up a Siciliano. Hello, kiss it, did you get happy in the pizza when you mambo